Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hadith number 330 from Jabir ibn Samurah. It's his statement when he says that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would finish the Salat al-Fajr, he would remain seated in his place until the sun fully rose. And in another narration, Jabir ibn Samurah was asked, "Did you used to sit with the Prophet?" And he said, "Yes, I used to sit with him much." And that the Prophet would not get up from his musalla in which he prayed the Salat al-Subh until the sun rose. And he says they used to speak about the matters of the Jahiliyyah, and they would be laughing and the Prophet would be smiling. So from this we learn the virtue of Jabir ibn Samurah in that he would sit with the Prophet much. And when you keep yourself with good company, then this goodness rubs off on you. And that also we can take, they used to laugh at these matters of the Jahiliyyah. So there is no problem in laughing as long as there is a valid reason to do so. Otherwise, too much laughing is against upright and noble character. In the masjid, only useful speech should be spoken, and speech of buying and selling is haram. So you're not allowed to say anything which would include buying and selling. Even if the physical commodity is not transferred, still just to enter this contract verbally is not permitted.
We can take from this that if a person embraces Islam, then he's allowed to talk about all the silly things that he got up to in his days of kufr, and this is by way of making mention of the ni'mah of Allah Jalla wa Ala bestowed upon him. So he could say things like, "I used to go night clubbing and drinking, but then Allah Jalla wa Ala guided me from the nightclub to the masjid." So by way of recalling the ni'mah and by way of distinguishing between the truth and falsehood, recalling the misguided acts that you used to do in the times of kufr is permissible. Otherwise, we know that the general rule is you do not expose your sins.
Hadith 331 from Abu Hurairah that the Prophet ﷺ said, أحب البلاد إلى الله مساجدها وأبغض البلاد إلى الله أسواقها. The most beloved places to Allah are the masajid, and the most hated places to Allah are the markets. So we find from this hadith that from the attributes of Allah is love and hate. So He hates certain types of people and places, and He loves certain types of people and places. And we take from the hadith the immense virtue of the masajid of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And the love of Allah Jalla wa Ala is not what some people say, that it means that He intends to reward you. Because if masajid are most beloved to Allah, then how can Allah reward masajid? This does not make sense. So it clearly shows us, this hadith, that the love of Allah is not Him wanting to reward the person. Rather, the love of Allah is the love of Allah. Why are the masajid so beloved to Allah? Well, the answer should be clear. Masajid are built for the sole purpose of the dhikr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Whether it be in terms of just adhkar, or recitation of the Quran, or the Salaah, or the durus. Why are the markets the most hated places to Allah? Well, because in the markets, no one is remembering Allah Jalla wa Ala because they're too busy making money. And also you could have other problems like people lying and cheating in their business dealings, shouting, perhaps abusing each other. All of this could be taking place in the markets. So you have the least remembrance of Allah in the markets and the most in the masajid. That's why one is the most hated and the other is the most beloved to Allah Jalla wa Ala. Of course, when it comes to the most hated places, then we know that there are certain places purpose-built for the disobedience of Allah. Because at least with the markets, buying and selling is not disobedience, it is permitted. But some places are built purposefully for the disobedience of Allah Jalla wa Ala, such as places where alcohol is drunk or khamr is consumed. So these places then would be even worse. Hadith 332 from Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari, the Prophet said, يَأُمُّ الْقَوْمَ أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ فَإِنْ كَانُوا فِي الْقِرَاءَةِ سَوَاءً فَأَعْلَمُهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ فَإِنْ كَانُوا بِالسُّنَّةِ سَوَاءً فَأَقْدَمُهُمْ هِجْرَةً فَإِنْ كَانُوا فِي الْهِجْرَةِ سَوَاءً فَأَقْدَمُهُمْ سِلْمًا وَلَا يَؤُمَّنَّ الرَّجُلُ الرَّجُلَ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ وَلَا يَقْعُدْ في بيته على تكريمته إلا بإذنه. The one who has memorized the most Quran leads the prayer. If they are equal in that, then the one who has most knowledge of the Sunnah. If they are equal in that, then the one who made hijrah first. If they are equal in that, than the one who entered Islam first, and a man should not lead another man in his house. So a man should not lead the owner of a house in prayer, and neither should a person sit in another person's place specially designed for him, or a special place where that person sits. So you're not allowed to sit in that place, because this would be offensive to the owner of that place, unless of course he permits you. This hadith gives us the order which we follow when we are trying to decide who is most fitting to lead. And when we say the one who has memorized the most Quran, this includes also the tajweed, because if a person recites the letters so as to change the meaning, then he is not allowed to lead the prayer, because if you change the meaning, then you change the whole Quran. And also it needs to be known that the one who leads the prayer should know the rulings of the prayer. So for example, if he makes a mistake, what should be done? He needs to know these basic rulings of the prayer as well. But the general qaida which we need to know about the imamah, or leading the prayer, is that whoever's prayer is correct, then his imamah is also correct. So that even if you have a Muslim who is a complete evildoer, as long as he's a Muslim, his prayer is correct. So therefore his imamah is also correct. And the hadith which speaks about a fajr not leading a mu'min in prayer, that is weak. And even if it was sahih, we would say that the fajr refers to a kafir, not an evil-doing Muslim. As for not leading a man in prayer in his own house, then we say that the man of the house has most right to lead the prayer. It makes no difference who has the most Quran or not. The ultimate point is that the man of the house leads the prayer. Of course he can give permission to others to lead the prayer, that's fine, that's his right. But nobody can overcome him and lead the prayer. Similarly, if there is some place which is reserved for this man to sit on, because of his status or he has some honor, then nobody else is allowed to sit in this place, because this would be, as we say, stepping on his toes. And what will this lead to? It will lead to enmity, hatred, and ill feeling and rancor between the Muslims, which is what the Sharia seeks to prevent. Some scholars say that when it comes to the supreme ruler, the Khalifa, then he can come into any masjid and lead the prayer, because his sultan or his authority is greater than the authority of the imam of the masjid.
From this narration, it also becomes known to us that a person who is not baligh yet, but has reached the age of tamyiz, can lead the salah if he knows more Quran than the adults. In fact, we have a specific evidence for this, the narration of Amr ibn Salama. Likewise, a person who is handicapped in any way whatsoever has most right to lead the salah if he knows more of the Quran. Likewise, if a person is a servant, he can lead a free person in accordance with this narration.
Hadith number 333 from Abu Hurairah. He says that in the Salat al-Fajr, after making the recitation, standing up, he would go into the ruku', then he would raise his head, saying, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd. And then, whilst in this standing position, he would say, Allahumma anjil Walid ibn al-Walid, wa Salamat ibn Hisham, wa Ayyash ibn Abi Rabi'ah, wal mustad'afina min al-mu'minin, Allahumma shdud wat'ataka ala mudar, waj'alha alayhim kasinini Yusuf. Allahumma al'an lihyana, wa ri'lan, wa dhakwana, wa usayyata, asatillaha wa rasulah. So the dua he would make is that, O Allah, save Walid ibn al-Walid and Salama ibn Hisham and Ayyash ibn Abi Rabi'ah and all those weak ones from the believers. O Allah, make severe your punishment against Mudar, which is a tribe, and give them drought just like what happened in the time of Yusuf alayhi salam. O Allah, curse the tribe of Lihyan and Ri'al and Dhakwan and Usayya, who disobeyed Allah and His Messenger. And then Abu Hurairah says that it reached us that he stopped saying it when the ayah of the Quran was revealed, لَيْسَ لَكَ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٌ أَوْ يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ أَوْ يُعَذِّبَهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ ظَالِمُونَ. The matter is not for you to decide, O Prophet. It could be that Allah accepts their repentance or He punishes them, for they are the oppressors. This dua, which we have just heard, was the Qunut al-Nazila, which was done by the Prophet, and this is when a calamity befalls the Muslims. So here, some of the Muslims in Mecca were being persecuted, the Prophet of course being in Al-Madinah, so he made dua for these Muslims. and he mentioned a few names there which you heard. So it is permissible to take the names of certain people in your dua as well. The Prophet made dua against certain tribes from the mushrikeen, Lihyan, Ri'l, Dhakwan and Usayya. And also he asked drought to come upon Mudar. These tribes were the worst in their oppression against the Muslims. We find from the hadith that it is permissible to curse the kuffar in a general sense, but not on an individual level. Just as the Prophet did here, he cursed the tribes of the kuffar, but he did not curse them individually, like making mention of a person's name. So whereas you can make dua for an individual person, making mention of his name, but you're not allowed to curse an individual person, making mention of his name, but you can do it for the kuffar generally. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, Inna Allah la'ana al-kafirina wa a'adda lahum sa'ira. Allah has cursed the kuffar and has prepared for them the fire. And you can raise your voice here, and the congregation will also follow the Imam in this dua. The narration mentions the Salat al-Fajr. We have a narration in Sunan Abi Dawud which says that the Prophet did it for all of the 5 prayers. He did this for a month. So it can be done in all prayers. Although in some narrations, Salat al-Fajr and Salat al-Maghrib have been specifically made mention by name. So at best we can say that they are more emphasized. However, all prayers can be used for the Qunut al-Nazila. The other question is, who does it? Some people say only the Al-Imam al-A'zam does it. So that would be the Khalifa. Some said that the Imam of Masjid does it and everyone else follows him. So the Imam of every Masjid. And others like Ibn Taymiyyah say that an individual can do it, even by himself. And he relies on the hadith, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, pray as you see me pray. And this hadith is general, and it includes the Qunut al-Nazila. In another narration in the same chapter in Muslim, Abu Hurairah says that I will pray just like the Prophet prayed, and he, meaning Abu Hurairah, used to make the Qunut in the Dhuhr and Isha and the Salat al-Subh. He would make dua for the believers and he would curse the kuffar. So again, this idea of making dua for the believers, either generally or specifically, meaning by name, and then the curse against the kuffar can be done only generally, but never on an individual basis. The tribes which are mentioned, Lihyan, Dhakwan, Ri'l and Usayya, these are tribes who killed some of the companions of the Prophet at or near a well called Ma'una. And this was a treachery on their part, because in the beginning they pretended to be friends, but when these companions were alone with the mushrikeen, they killed them. So the mushrikeen pretended that they wanted to learn about Islam. So the Prophet sent some of the companions who recited the Quran well to go and teach the mushrikeen, but actually these mushrikeen had another plan up their sleeves, which was simply to kill the companions. And so this is why the Prophet ﷺ made this dua against them, and he did this for 1 month. Anas ibn Malik was asked, and this is also in the same chapter, is the Qunut al-Nazila after the ruku' or before the ruku'? And he answered that it is after the ruku', and that the Prophet did it for 1 month against some of the mushrikeen who killed the Quran reciters from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Qunut al-Nazila is only done during times of calamity. And this is not like some everyday calamity, rather it is the unusual type of calamity, which does not happen every day. Because otherwise you'd be doing the Qunut al-Nazila every day, and this is not the Sunnah. The Sunnah is that the Qunut al-Nazila is done on a one-off occasion, for a limited period of time.
We may also take that in the dua of the Qunut, we can make mention of names of particular people, and that this does not break the Salah. And we can use words not found in the Quran, and that this does not break the Salah. Okay, what about the dua of al-Qunut in the Witr? In the Sunan, authentically it is narrated that Al-Hasan said that the Prophet taught him the dua for al-Witr, Allahumma hdini fi man hadayt, up until the end of it. Now that narration is authentic, which means that the dua al-Qunut in the Salat al-Witr can be said at all times. It is Sunnah, but not wajib. And it is said during the same place, after rising from the ruku'. Let it also be known that making dua al-Qunut in the Salat al-Subh is a bid'ah and not Sunnah. As for the narration which says that the Prophet made Qunut in the Salat al-Subh, up until he died, then the qunut here means dawamul ibadah, continuous worship. In other words, he recited long recitation in the Salat al-Subh, not that he made dua after the ruku'. So the dua of qunut is only in the Salat al-Witr on a regular basis, and the qunut al-nazila would be only during a particular calamity, making dua against the kuffar or for the Muslimin who are under some stress or distress from a man-made calamity, not a natural calamity. Also note that the qunut dua is recited out aloud even in those prayers which are recited silently, as the Dhuhr and the Asr prayers, because it is reported in the Sunan that the companions would say Ameen, and that is only possible if the dua is recited out aloud. Though there are scholars who say that even with natural calamities you can make dua al-qunut. It's just that we do not seem to find any evidence of the Prophet or the companions making dua al-qunut for natural calamities like the plague, such as the one which happened in a place called Umwas. So we say if someone does make qunut because of a natural calamity, then there is a scholarly opinion, but what appears to be weightier, looking at the evidence, is that the nazila needs to be something which happens from an enemy, such as the kuffar oppressing the Muslimin. Also let it be known that the qunut is done after the ruku' in the last raka'ah. It is not done every raka'ah, as we find in the authentic narration in the Sunan.
Hadith number 334. From Abu Hurairah, he said, we were on a journey, and at the end of the night we settled down to go to sleep. And he says they did not wake up until the sun had risen. So in other words, they missed the Salat al-Subh. When they woke up, the Prophet ﷺ told the companions, لِيَأْخُذْ كُلُّ رَجُلٍ بِرَأْسِ رَاحِلَتِهِ فَإِنَّ هَذَا مَنْزِلٌ حَضَرَنَا فِيهِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Every man should take the head of his riding animal and move away from here, because this is a place in which the shaitan has visited us. So they did so, moved away from that place, and afterwards the Prophet ordered for some water, and he made wudu, and he prayed the 2 rak'at. That was the sunnah, and then afterwards the iqamah was made, and he prayed the 2 fard. So we find in this narration that they missed the Salat al-Subh because they overslept. The Prophet ﷺ told Bilal radiallahu anh to stay awake and wake them up when the dawn breaks. However, Bilal was also overcome by the slumber, and he slept as well. So everybody overslept. So we take from this hadith that the Prophet is a human being, and that slumber can overcome him, and also that the sleeping person is not to be taken into account for missing the prayer, but the only thing upon him is to make up for it when he regains consciousness. As opposed to the one who deliberately does not pray until the time passes by, he does not have to make up for it. As a punishment for him, of course, not as a rukhsah. The interesting point from this hadith is that the Prophet did not pray in that same place. Why is this? The reason is, as he has given, the shaitan has been in this place or has visited them, and it is not fitting to pray in this sort of place. And this would be similar to not praying in the camel's stable, because the Prophet said that the camel is made out of the jinn, so he has the same or similar type of characteristics and features in the character. And it could also be that the shayateen frequent the stables of the camel. So we find then that the Prophet wanted to go away from this place so as to be removed from the effects of the shaitan. Is the adhan given? Well, the answer is, if it has not already been given in that place in which you're in, then you do give the adhan. If it has already been given, then we know the adhan is fard kifaya, so you don't have to give it again. So when you're praying the fard in the jama'ah, you can simply give the iqamah and start the fard jama'ah. Is the Salat al-Subh prayed out aloud or silently? Well, we say you do it out aloud, just as you would have done. And it makes no difference that you have passed its time now. We also learn that when something is obligatory upon you to do, like a wajib action, and you forget to do it, then you must do it when you remember it. This is the general principle. We ask an interesting question here. If you have to make up for the prayer, let's say Salat al-Subh, we know that there are 2 rak'at of the sunnah which precede it. Is it now more important for you to make up for the fard because that should take priority, or do you pray the rawatib sunan before the fard? Here we say that you would pray the rawatib sunan before the fard, and the reason for this is because they are in following the fard and they are linked to the fard. Otherwise, generally speaking, you always make up for the fard first and then any sunnah elements must be done afterwards. But with the rawatib sunan, we would make the exception because they are in following the fard, because they are strongly linked to the fard. And in the narration we have just heard, this is what the Prophet did. He prayed the 2 rak'at of the sunnah first and then he did the fard. Hadith 335, from Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, من نسي صلاة أو نام عنها فكفارتها أن يصليها إذا ذكرها. Whoever oversleeps the prayer or forgets it, then the expiation for this is that he must pray it whenever he remembers. So this hadith is simple and straightforward enough to understand. If you forget the prayer or you oversleep, then you pray whenever you remember and you're not allowed to delay anymore. You pray just as you would have prayed the prayer. So if it is a loud prayer, you pray it loud, a silent prayer is silent, and everything is done in the same way. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that if you oversleep the prayer and you wake up, then when you make up for this prayer, you're not making up for it. In fact, you're praying in the proper time, because he says that when you wake up, then the proper time for this prayer is when you wake up. And he takes the evidence from this hadith. He says that you're doing what the Prophet has ordered you to do. So in other words, you're praying in its proper time. Because for you specifically, this prayer is now being prayed in its proper time, according to this hadith. Simply because you're following the instruction of the Prophet. And so therefore this prayer would not be a qada, which is when you pray outside the proper time, but rather it would be an ada, praying in its proper time. The Imam now moves on to a new book, Kitab Salat al-Musafiri wa Qasriha, the prayer of the Musafir, the traveller, and shortening the prayer. So Hadith 336, the statement of Aisha, she says, the Salah was made fard as 2 rak'at, whether you are resident or travelling. Then afterwards, the Salah of the Safar, the travelling prayer, remained as 2, and the Salah of the Hadar, when you are resident, was increased. And also in the same chapter, Az-Zuhri asked Urwa, what is the issue with Aisha that she prays the full 4 during her travels? And Urwa replies that she made her interpretation just like Uthman made his interpretation. In other words, they interpreted it to be that it is recommended to shorten the prayer to 2 rak'at when you're on the journey. And we know that Uthman radiallahu anh, in Mina, when they went to perform the Hajj, we know that the 4 rak'at prayer you pray as 2 rak'at, but later on in his Khilafah he prayed it as a full 4 in Mina, which caused some controversy. And many of the Sahaba disliked this idea. But Uthman made his ijtihad, and Aisha would complete the 4 rak'at in the journey as well because of her ijtihad. So from the narration of Aisha, some scholars have said that the 2 rak'at prayer in the journey is not shortening the prayer. Rather, it is just keeping the prayer as it used to be. So you're not shortening it to anything. It used to be 2, and it is still 2. Therefore, there's no shortening. Other scholars say, no, you're shortening it from 4 to 2. So you can see that there's a difference in interpretation. And from this stems the question, if you're on a journey which is haram, then can you shorten the prayer? Those scholars who say that this is a rukhsa, meaning from 4 to 2, they say that the rukhsa cannot be taken with something which is haram. The other scholars would say that even if this journey is haram, you can still shorten it, because this is not a rukhsa. It is not lightening of the load. It used to be 2, it is still 2. So therefore, this idea that you cannot take a rukhsa using the haram does not even apply. So for example, if you're traveling to a casino, let's say, in a different country, this is a haram travel without a doubt. So most scholars say that you cannot take this rukhsa of shortening the prayer, because a rukhsa cannot be taken with that which is haram. Other scholars will say, no, this is not a rukhsa, therefore you can pray it as 2 rak'at, because this is the asl of the prayer, it is 2 rak'at. So nothing is being shortened here. But we say the most balanced opinion appears to be that it is sunnah mu'akkada, an extremely emphasized sunnah to pray 2 rak'at during your travel. We're talking about the 4 rak'at prayers, of course. And this is because when Uthman radiallahu anh prayed 4 in Mina, the companions followed him. If it had been haram to pray 4, then the companions would not follow Uthman in doing something which is haram. And we also say the one who makes ijtihad and he gets the wrong decision, then there's no sin upon him as long as he was trying to fear Allah Jalla wa Ala as much as is possible. And many a time the Sahaba made ijtihad and they got things wrong. This is not a sinful action. So what we say is that if somebody is on a haram travel, let's say traveling to a casino or something, we tell him, look, you can shorten your prayer, but you turn back. We don't tell him you must pray the full prayer, because otherwise that would actually mean we're telling him to continue on with your journey, which is of course wrong. Some ulama have said that the shortening of the prayer can only be done on the wajib type of travel, so the traveling to go hajj, or traveling to visit an ill person if it is wajib upon you. But the correct opinion is that any travel which is not haram, then you can shorten the prayer. Hadith 337 from Ya'la ibn Umayyah, he says, I said to Umar ibn al-Khattab that the ayah in the Quran, لَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَقْصُرُوا مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ إِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَن يَفْتِنَكُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. There is no sin upon you that you should shorten the prayer if you fear that the kuffar will harm you. He says, but now we are not in fear, we are in peace. And so Umar replied that I asked the Prophet about this, and the Prophet said, صَدَقَةٌ تَصَدَّقَ اللَّهُ بِهَا عَلَيْكُمْ فَاقْبَلُوا صَدَقَتَهُ. This is a sadaqah which Allah has given you, so accept it from Him. So the narration means to say that even if you don't fear the enemies or the kuffar attacking you, you can still shorten the prayer, because this is a sadaqah which Allah Jalla wa Ala has given you. So you should accept His sadaqah. In the same way, when somebody gives you a gift, you don't just throw it back at his face, you accept it. This would be good manners. It's a similar case with the ramal, where you slightly jog the first 3 circuits in the tawaf al-qudum. The illah, the justification, was that it was to show the kuffar that the Muslims have strength. Some people might say because it is a sadaqah, it is only a sunnah to shorten the prayer, but we say no, just because it is a sadaqah does not mean it is mustahab, it can still be wajib. And besides, the Prophet gives the order here, فَاقْبَلُوا صَدَقَتَهُ, accept his sadaqah. So that's an order. It would suggest to us that we must accept this sadaqah. And just because Allah Jalla wa Ala says that there is no sin upon you to shorten the prayer does not mean that it is mustahab, because when there is no sin upon you to do something, that action could still be wajib. For example, he says that there is no sin upon the one who makes the hajj and the umrah to make the sa'i between the Safa and Marwa. إن الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله فمن حج البيت أو اعتمر فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف بهما. There is no sin upon him to make the tawaf between the Safa and Marwa. Do we now say that this is mustahab? The answer is, it is not just obligatory, it is an absolute rukn of the hajj and the umrah that you perform the sa'i. But the reason why Allah says that there is no sin upon you is to remove a doubt which the Sahaba had. They did not want to imitate the mushrikeen who would make the sa'i between the Safa and Marwa. So Allah is telling them that there is no sin upon you to make the Safa and Marwa sa'i, and that you should not think that you are imitating the mushrikeen. But this is not to say that the sa'i between the Safa and Marwa is not wajib. Rather, it is definitely wajib. And your hajj or umrah can never be accepted until you perform the sa'i. So with the salah now, Allah is telling us that there is no sin upon you to shorten the prayer. This is to remove any doubt that a person may have. He may be thinking, how could I perform a 4 rak'ah prayer as 2 rak'ahs? He may have this doubt, so Allah Jalla wa Ala is telling us that there is no sin upon you to shorten the prayer from a 4 rakat to a 2 rakat because Allah has sanctioned it.
It's worth noting also that a travel is defined by the customs of the people, not by numbers of miles, because this could change from time to time and place to place, and we do not have any definitive text in the Sharia which tells us what a travel is. Therefore we refer to the customs. And this is a general rule when it comes to the nitty-gritty details of the ahkam. And for most people, a travel would be when you pack your bags with clothes and certain essentials that you will need on your journey. Also, you can begin to shorten the salah when you leave the town, city or hamlet that you are in, because only then do you become a musafir, one who leaves his place of residence.
Hadith 338, the statement of Ibn Abbas, he says that Allah made the salah fard on the tongue of your Prophet when you are resident as 4 rakat, when you are on a travel as 2 rakat, and when in the state of fear, meaning Salatul Khawf, as 1 rak'ah. So the new information which this narration gives us is the Salatul Khawf as 1 rak'ah. And this could be possible. The Imam prays with the first half of the group 1 rak'ah, and he prays with the second half of the group 1 rak'ah, so that the Imam in total has prayed 2 rakat, and each of the group has prayed 1 rak'ah. So it could work like this. and this could be the case if the fear is immense or intense or immediate, so that you have to shorten the prayer even more. So this could be possible, and it is one of the versions of the Salat al-Khawf. Otherwise, there are other versions as well. Hadith 339, the statement of Anas ibn Malik, he says that the Prophet ﷺ prayed Salat al-Dhuhr in al-Madinah as 4 rak'at, and he prayed Salat al-Asr at Dhul Hulayfa as 2 rak'at. So we find here that he prayed al-Dhuhr in al-Madinah as 4 rak'at because he was not on a travel there. In al-Madinah it is a resident town for him. But in Dhul Hulayfa, which is the miqat for the people of al-Madinah when they go to Hajj or Umrah, he prayed Asr as 2 rak'at. That's because he was on a journey. If you are on a journey and Salat al-Asr enters in, and you don't pray it quite yet, then you reach your hometown, how would you pray your Asr? Would you pray it as 2 rak'at, which is what you do on a travel, or do you pray it as a full 4? The answer is you pray it as a full 4 because you are now no longer on a journey. Hence you're not allowed to pray the 4 rak'at as 2. The question is, what distance counts as a journey? Some scholars have said 48 miles, but the correct opinion is that it is down to the customs of the people. So in other words, whenever people have to pack their bags and set out on a journey, then this would be classified as a journey. If, for example, you're traveling a long distance out of your city and you're going to return back the very same day, for example, you're a coach driver, then even though the distance is long because you're going from one city to another, it doesn't appear to be a journey because it's more like a 9-to-5 job. You leave in the morning and you come back in the evening. So here, normally the people would not deem that to be a journey. Hence, we would say that you do not shorten your prayer if you're working like this, meaning as a coach driver. Because even though the distance is actually long, but it's not deemed as a journey. When you are on a journey, you can shorten the prayer and you can combine the prayers as well. What about the rawatib sunan, which are before and after the fard prayers? Well, we say the Prophet did not pray these, except for the sunnah of the fajr. That's the only exception. And the witr he did pray in the journey as well. But other than that, the rawatib sunan are not to be prayed because the Prophet did not do it. When it comes to the other sunan, for example the duha or salat al-istikhara for example, then these can be done on a journey. During the Hajj, the people who are normally resident in Mecca, they do not shorten the prayer in Mecca. But when they move out to Mina, Muzdalifah and Arafah, then this is a separate travel, and so here they are deemed to be musafirun or travelers, which will enable them to shorten the prayer and to combine it as well. And this is the weightier view of the scholars, because others say that even the people of Mecca, they do not shorten the prayer when they go out to Mina and Muzdalifah and Arafah. However, it could be argued now that Mina is so close to Mecca that it may as well be part of Mecca. So if that's the case, then it would not hold true that the people of Mecca are leaving their city, such that they would be entitled to shorten the prayer. Remember, you are entitled to shorten the prayer and combine the prayer when you're on a journey, when you leave your city, not before you leave your city. As for before you leave your city, then you have to pray the full 4 and you are not allowed to shorten it. So the shortening happens not when you leave your house, but rather when you leave your city or your town or your village. Hadith 340, the statement of Ibn Umar, he says the Prophet ﷺ prayed 2 rak'at in Mina, so did Abu Bakr after him and Umar after him, and so did Uthman during the beginning of his Khilafah, but then later on he prayed 4 in Mina. And it goes on to say that Ibn Umar, when he would pray with the Imam, he would pray 4, but when he would pray by himself, he would pray 2 in Mina. So praying 2 rak'at in Mina is straightforward enough because you're on a journey. But Uthman prayed it as 4. Now this is likely to be an ijtihad on his part, and not all of the companions agreed. In fact, Ibn Mas'ud vehemently disagreed, even though he did follow Uthman in praying 4. And he did not make a fuss about this because he said that this differing is evil. So he will let go of his own personal fiqh opinion, which is to say you pray 2, and he will follow the Imam just for the sake of unity. And this also shows that it is permissible to pray 4 rak'at on a travel, though it is not recommended. What is recommended is that you should pray 2. Because if it was outright haram to pray 4, then the Sahaba would not have followed Uthman in praying 4. Because Uthman and the companions were travelers, and the companions would not allow Uthman radiallahu anh to commit this haram action, which is to pray 4. So we can say that praying 4 is not haram, but it is not recommended. You ought to pray 2. And really, we can extend this idea to when it comes to these differences of opinion as to when Ramadan begins. Some people begin it one day, and some other people in the same community begin the Ramadan the next day. And that is clearly a fitna. But we need to learn to sacrifice our own fiqh opinions and show precedence to the unity. So those minority of the Muslims who say that we will only fast at the sighting of the moon, they ought to let go of this opinion, even though it does have a valid basis, but for the sake of unity they ought to let it go. Because Ramadan, and fasting for that matter in Ramadan, is when the community fasts. Same with the Eid. The Eid is when the community makes the Eid, both Fitr and Adha. The Prophet ﷺ said authentically in At-Tirmidhi, صومكم يوم تصومون وفطركم يوم تفطرون وأضحيتكم يوم تضحون. Your fasting is when all of you fast. Your fitr is when all of you make fitr. And your sacrifice is when all of you make sacrifice. So it's a communal act. It must be done all together, not half of the people doing it one day and the other half doing it the other. So therefore it is upon the minority to let go of their own personal fiqh for the sake of the unity. It's the same thing with the raka'at in Taraweeh. Some people may say it is only 11 and no more, so they would leave after 11 behind an imam who's praying 23. We say again, you let go of your own personal opinion in favor of the unity. What is most important here is that you pray with the imam until he finishes the prayer, because then you bag yourself the reward of praying the whole night. Hadith 341, about the prayer when it's raining. From Nafi', the freed servant of Ibn Umar, he says that Ibn Umar made the adhan on a rainy night, and it was also cold and windy. And he said in this adhan, أَلَا صَلُّوا فِي الرِّحَالِ, behold, you should pray in your homes. And then Ibn Umar said that the Prophet used to order the mu'adhin when it was a cold night and raining as well, that you should say, أَلَا صَلُّوا فِي الرِّحَالِ, lo, pray in your homes. Meaning to say, do not come to the masjid. And similarly in the same chapter from Jabir, he said that we were on a journey with the Prophet and it started to rain, and the Prophet said, لِيُصَلِّ مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ فِي رَحْلِهِ, whoever of you wants to may pray in his own dwelling place. And from Abdullah bin Abbas, when you say أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله, that's in your adhan, then you should not say حي على الصلاة, come to the salah, but rather you should say صلوا في بيوتكم, pray in your homes. And when he said this to the people, they reacted as if to reject this idea. And Ibn Abbas said, do you wonder at this? The one who is better than me did this. The Salat al-Jum'ah is a firm order, and I dislike to take you out of your homes so that you should have to walk in the mud and the dirt. So from this narration of Ibn Abbas, it appears this was on a Yawm al-Jum'ah. So when it is raining on a Yawm al-Jum'ah, you don't have to come to the masjid, you can pray in your home. But if you pray in your home, it would have to be Salat al-Dhuhr. And we can also take from all of these narrations that you don't have to come to the masjid when it is raining. And the rain is such that it would wet your clothes, so it would cause some inconvenience. And this is simply a rukhsa or a lightening of the load from the Sharia, which we should be grateful for. And so we find in the adhan, instead of saying Hayya ala salah and Hayya ala al-falah, you simply say Sallu fi rihalikum or Sallu fi buyutikum. And you would say this twice, and then you would move on with the rest of the adhan. So in other words, with this adhan, you would not call people to come to the masjid, rather you would tell them to stay in your homes. We can also take from the statement of the Prophet, لِيُصَلِّ مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ فِي رَحْلِهِ, whoever of you wants to may pray in his dwelling place. We can take from that normally you would pray Salat al-Jama'ah even if you are on a journey. But the only reason why they would pray in their dwelling places here is because it was raining. Some scholars have said that you say pray in your homes after you have given the normal full adhan. But the narration of Ibn Abbas is clear that you do not say Hayya ala salah, but rather you say Sallu fi buyutikum. Hadith 342, about praying a Salat al-Nafila on your riding animal when you're on a journey and not facing the Qibla. From Ibn Umar, he says that the Prophet would pray as he was going from Mecca to Al-Madinah on his riding animal, and he would face wherever the riding animal would be facing, so not necessarily towards the Kaaba. And Ibn Umar says that Allah said, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, wherever you face, there is the face of Allah. We take from this narration that if you are on a journey and you are riding, then you can pray a Salat al-Nafila facing other than the Qibla. and this is a lightening of the load. It simply encourages people to pray the nafilah on a journey. But this is not allowed with the fard, because with the fard prayer we have to be more strict. And in fact we have a clear-cut narration that the Prophet would not do this in the fard prayer, but he would do this in the nafilah prayer, and he would also do this in the witr prayer, which proves to us firstly that the witr is prayed on a journey, and then secondly it proves to us that the witr is not fard. As for Allah saying, فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, then there is the face of Allah, some have said that this means the direction of Allah, because wajh can mean jiha or direction, so you would be facing Allah. And others have said that the face means the face of Allah. And this second opinion is weightier because we know when you are in the prayer, you are facing Allah. So whichever direction you are facing Allah Jalla wa Ala. And so the word wajh, or face, is to be taken as it is the face of Allah. Despite the fact that Allah is above the heavens. Another narration in the same chapter, from Abdullah, he says that the Prophet would make the prayer on his riding animal, whichever direction it would face, and he would pray the witr on it as well, but he would not pray the maktuba or the fard prayers. So like we said, this proves that the witr is prayed on a journey, and also it is not fard. Some scholars have said that the nafilah prayer on your riding animal, you have to begin the prayer facing the qibla, then afterwards wherever the animal faces, it's fine. But this does not seem to be apparent from these narrations which we find in Sahih Muslim. So we do not make that stipulation. So how would you pray on a riding animal then? Well, the ruku' and the sujood would simply have to be done using gestures. So your sujood would be lower than your ruku'. Some scholars have said that you can even do it when walking, so you don't have to be riding on an animal. So you could pray the nafilah even whilst walking. And others have opposed this opinion. They said that when you're walking, then you yourself are performing many actions as you move your feet. But when you're riding on an animal, you are still, and this is more fitting for the prayer. So it seems as though it just depends on how you look at it. If you give emphasis on encouraging the nafilah prayer on a journey, then you would say yes, even when you're walking you could pray the nafilah prayer. And if you give emphasis on staying still and tranquil in the prayer, then you would say no, you should not pray a nafilah when you are walking. And so this is a debatable issue.
Okay, now here's a question. Can you pray on your animal facing whichever direction when you're not on a travel, meaning when you're resident? The answer here appears to be that it is impermissible, because the default position is that you must face the qibla in whatever prayer you are praying. And this is not to be departed from except with evidence. So we have evidence for a journey, but we do not have evidence for when you are resident.
Hadith 343, about combining the prayers in the journey. From the father of Salim, he says, I saw the Prophet combine between Maghrib and Isha when he was on the move on a journey. Similarly, in the same chapter, the narration from Anas ibn Malik, he says, when the Prophet would set out on a journey before Dhuhr time, meaning before the sun inclines, he would delay the Dhuhr and pray it with the Asr, so he'd combine it. And if he left for a journey after Dhuhr time, then he would pray the Dhuhr and then set out. The combining of the prayers is done due to a hardship, not necessarily due to traveling. And it makes no difference whether you bring the Asr forward and combine it with Dhuhr, or you delay Dhuhr and combine it with Asr. Likewise with the Maghrib, you can combine it at the earlier time of Maghrib or at the later time at Isha. When we talk about combining of the prayers, we talk about combining between the two timings of the prayer. So the two timings of the prayer become like one timing. Do you have to be on the move to combine the prayer? Well, the weightier opinion here is no, you don't have to be on the move. In fact, you can be stationary, like resting at a place. And we find evidence for this. During the Hajjatul Wada', the Prophet was resting in a place called Al-Abtah, and he combined the prayers there. Likewise in the Battle of Tabuk, he was resting at a place, and what's narrated is that he came out, combined between the Dhuhr and Asr, and then he went back in his tent. Then later on he came back out, combined between the Maghrib and Isha, and went back in his tent. And what is apparent here is that he was stationary. But what we say is that if you are stationary, like resting somewhere on a journey, it is better that you do not combine it, because there is less hardship on you in a case like this. Although if you did combine it, then we could not say it is haram. As for shortening the prayer, then you ought to shorten the prayer when you are on your journey. This is a stressed sunnah. Also in combining the prayer, it is not a condition that you should have made your intention to combine the prayer. Rather, you can pray the first prayer without the intention of combining, then after the first prayer, if you feel like combining it, then you can do so. It is not a condition that you should have your intention prior. It's just that some ulama have given this as a condition, but it is not. Also, is it a condition that if you're combining between the prayers, it should be done one after the other, as if it was one act of worship? So the Dhuhr you'd pray, you'd make the salam, and then immediately, or at least very shortly afterwards, you get up for the Asr? Or could you have a significant gap, let's say about half an hour? Well, the answer is you can have a significant gap. It is a very flexible issue. Remember, it is the timings that you are combining, so that it all becomes one time. So during that one time, you can pray Dhuhr and Asr whenever you want to. You can combine them at the early time, combine them at the later time, or pray one and then pray the other 15 minutes later, perhaps half an hour later, even 1 hour later. It is a very flexible issue. The only real condition which we would give is to say that they must be done in order, so that Dhuhr comes before Asr.
And so on. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Why are the markets the most hated places to Allah Jalla wa Ala, as is mentioned in the hadith? Question number 2. When is the Qunutun Nazila to be said? Meaning, on what type of occasions? Question number 3. Discuss the issue of praying the Nafila whilst walking on a journey, facing whichever direction you happen to be facing.